Okay, so keeping it going, Nkrumah tried a number of ways in order to unify African states, but not just to unify African states, but also to develop them economically and to preview the possibilities of mutual aid and mutual assistance across African freedom struggles. So, for example, when Ahmed Sekou Touré, who was the leader of the Republic of Guinea, said no to the French community, which was a kind of neocolonial commonwealth proposal suggested by the French imperialists under de Gaulle. The French, in retaliation, decided to uproot everything that they had in France, right? Like, from Guinea, and withdraw it into France, right? So basically, Guinea had no resources. Due to its severe underdevelopment, and now its lack of any kind of relationship with the French metropole. So Nkrumah came through with crucial aid for the Republic of Guinea at a time when it was being isolated in punishment for rejecting a neocolonial arrangement. Additionally, he tried to develop the resources of his own state, of his own nation, through the Volta River Project, which was initiated, or the planning for the Volta River Project was initiated by the British, by the colonial authorities, but they quickly dropped it after Ghana moved into independence. Nkrumah picked it up in 1958, and he found that the British were very uncooperative in his attempts to move Ghana toward energy independence. And the Volta Dam that he was working on would have also developed industry, native industry in the country, because his goal was to have a reliable energy source through harnessing water power from the Volta River to power manufacturing for the other primary industries and secondary industries that were now dominated by British and increasingly American finance capital. Okay, so the Western powers did not like this, in spite of the fact that on the surface they tried to act like they were cool with Nkrumah, because they didn't want the overtures that were being made by the Soviet bloc to be successful. They were still engaged in a Cold War geopolitically with the Soviet Union, so they had to put up a front, right? But obviously they didn't appreciate Nkrumah's anti-imperialist politics. They didn't appreciate his desire to move Ghana toward energy, manufacturing, and other forms of economic independence. They didn't appreciate his efforts to unite with Modibo Keita in Mali and with Sekou Touré in Guinea, in a federation of West African states that would have previewed the possibilities for an all-African government. That could replace the colonial governments throughout the continent. Okay, so another way that Nkrumah tried to advance African unity was through a secret agreement that he drew up on August 8th, 1960, with Patrice Lumumba. Okay, and this explains why he actually in 1960 sent troops into the Congo in an abortive effort to save Lumumba's government, because actually he had worked out a secret plan with Lumumba to form a united African government, okay, that any African state would be admitted into. Okay, the base would have been at what was then Leopoldville, what's now called Kinshasa. Okay, so the base would have actually been in the Congo, which shows that Nkrumah was not terribly interested in personal power, in making Ghana, the center or, the capital of an all-African government, but he was interested in the unity of African governments for purposes of common defense, common economic development, common cultural, social, and political development, right? So I just want to read an extract from this secret agreement, which can be found in the text Revolutionary Path. Okay, so the president of the Republic of Ghana and the prime minister have given serious thought to the idea of African unity and have decided to establish, with the approval of the governments and peoples of their respective states, among themselves a union of African states. The union would have a republican constitution within a federal framework, right? So in terms of foreign affairs, common defense, common currency, and economic development and planning, this would have been a very dangerous thing for the imperialists to see. Okay, and it goes to show that while on the surface, the Western states, recognizing that Nkrumah was an important figure within the non-aligned movement, were acting like his friend. They saw that he was invested in the most revolutionary currents on the continent, such as Patrice Lumumba's government, such as the Democratic Party in Guinea, right? And as well as the struggles against settler colonialism in East Africa and in the southern countries of the African continent. Okay, so because Nkrumah recognized that the assassination attempts against him and the attempts to frustrate his moves toward industrial independence for Ghana, and to consolidate the the balkanized African nation states into a unified government, were those efforts were being stultified by the Western powers. He began to incline away from Western cooperation. Okay, and the opposition, led by Bouzia in exile, who had been exiled really since the Preventive Detention Act of 1958, they started increasingly red baiting Nkrumah, right? So there were always these accusations that, oh, you know, Nkrumah's just a communist agent, so on and so forth. And I mean, the moves that he made, by the way, you know, after becoming president, give the lie to this, right? Like, for example, his chief advisor on African affairs was George Padmore, who was persona non grata in the Comintern and in the international communist movement, right? So this is not the kind of person that you would appoint if you're interested in making overtures to the Soviet Union. Okay. But he was inclining away from Western cooperation. And you saw, for example, in 1960 at a congressional hearing that Bouzia testified to Senator Dodd, who was a really important figure for the McCarthyite reaction in this country. He testified that Nkrumah was, you know, a communist agent, a communist subversive, and that he also recommended that the United States cease any financial support for the Ghanaian nation and its projects. Okay, so the United States became a more important negotiating partner after the British, you know, under you know, a conservative party resurgence, started to vilify Nkrumah more and more and more. Okay, so this was a stab in the back of Ghanaian independence movement, because the things that Nkrumah was really pushing for had nothing to do with the objectives of the Soviet Union. But it just so happened that if you are isolating him from any other alternative source of funding for his independence projects, that he's going to become increasingly interested in not only African unity, so that we can draw on the resources that we lack in one country from another country that might have those resources, but also increasingly to move him into what at that time was considered to be the socialist bloc. Okay, so you know, the Soviet Union and the Eastern European countries, as well as newly liberated People's Republic of China and everything else. Okay, so the reactionaries within the Western Bloc pushed Nkrumah away from non-alignment and more toward Pan-Africanist objective on the one hand, and cooperation with the Soviet Union on the other. So I'm going to say a little bit more about that in the next video.